through feast and famine. The hardest times, though, were during the war. Federals and Confederates moved through here constantly, and they always needed supplies. Sometimes they asked, other times they just took it. We never knew when we would hear a polite knock on the door or the loud thud of a rifle butt. But we had managed to miss fighting in our little area around Ashby Gap until near the very end of the war. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was February. We had a blizzard on the 6th of that month that put 2 feet of snow on the ground. It was almost a week before anybody could go anywhere. By the middle of that month, there was still snow on the ground, but the roads and trails were passable again. Then on the evening of the 18th, about 200 Federals crossed the river from Camp Averell near Winchester. They passed by those of us on the mountain and headed to Paris, where they split up. Some went to Upperville, and others headed down to Crooked Run Valley looking for Confederate soldiers, especially Colonel Mosby's men and Southern sympathizers. I hear tell there were 2 deserters leading them. They took supplies and horses from folks and captured 16 of Mosby's Rangers. One group of them went looking for Major Dolly Richards at his home at Green Gardens, but didn't catch him. He hid in a hidden space behind a closet in his house. They took his uniform, though. While they were on the hunt for Mosby's men, the soldiers from the 21st New York Cavalry that were in Upperville stole 2 kegs of whiskey. They drained them that night. When the troops left in the morning, 6 of them were too drunk to go, so they were left behind. Apparently, there was a mix-up in the orders from Major Gibson of the 14th Pennsylvania, he was the commander of the operation, and Captain Snow of the New York Cavalry. The major sent new orders to Captain Snow to meet him at Manassas Gap, but the captain never got the order, so he headed out of Upperville and back to Ashby Gap. Meanwhile, Major Gibson was waiting for him at Manassas Gap. When the New Yorkers didn't show, the Pennsylvanians headed to Upperville. When they found that Captain Snow and his troops had left already, they headed toward Ashby Gap. Meanwhile, Mosby's men were gathering, 43 of them if I remember correctly, and started to chase the Yankees. Major Richards, who had borrowed clothes from his father, tried to attack Major Gibson's Pennsylvanians as they were leaving Upperville, but were repelled, so they followed at a distance as the Yankees headed west. I was at Mount Carmel Church that day, cleaning the church after Sunday worship. When I heard the horses from the first group of Yankees ride by, I stepped outside to look at what was going on. They were moving at a good pace towards Shepherd's Ford. I felt little of it at the time. I was just glad to see them leaving. Then, right as I was preparing to leave, the second group of Yankees stopped near the church. There were over 100 of them, maybe 150. They had horses and other stolen property in their possession, and I saw the prisoners with their hands bound. They could travel no more than 2 abreast because the road, if you want to call it that, to Shepherd's Ford was narrow and bordered by thick undergrowth. I ducked behind the church as they rode by. Then I heard the most terrible screaming and shots firing, and Major Richards and his men were like a battering ram hitting the rear of the Yankee column. The Yankees managed to fire 1 volley with their carbines, but Mosby's men got in close range too quickly for a second volley. Each of the Rangers had at least 2 revolvers, and they were certainly using them. The battle was swift and furious as they moved away from the church. I could hear the screaming in the guns. I put my hands to my ears and closed my eyes. God help us! Though it seemed like an hour, it was really just minutes before things quieted down, from many shots fired to just 1 or 2. Then I heard a loud yell. I couldn't see who won. I hoped it was the Rangers. One of them rode swiftly to the church and found me frozen with terror. He told me that they needed to use the church for the many wounded. So I opened all 3 doors and had them bring the wounded in. Meanwhile, one of the Rangers went to fetch more help. Oh, the blood and the carnage. The wounded were mostly Yankees. They screamed in pain from their wounds while we tried to care for them the best we could. We were there for hours. I was so tired as I left the church while others came to take over. I looked down Shepherd's Ford Road. The snow was crimson with blood, and strewn about were belts, carbines, chickens, and turkeys, both living and dead, and plunder of all kinds. I heard later that 13 Federals were killed. I saw one of them die from his wounds. I'll never forget watching him take his last breath. There were more wounded than I cared to count. The Rangers took 63 prisoners and 90 horses. Many were returned to their owners in Loudon and along Crooked Run. Only one of the Confederates was killed, John Iden. Rumor has it that he was killed in a melee by a bullet from one of his own men. Dr. Sowers was slightly wounded, but not so badly that he couldn't help treat the wounded. Later that day, there was a celebration in Paris. I didn't go. I had seen enough of war. There is no glory in it. Besides, it was a hollow victory. We all knew the South was going to fall.